I have the great pleasure of welcoming all of you to the University of South Florida, Sarasota-Manatee, for what I think is going to be a series of very interesting conversations this morning, and we are so proud to have all of you here today, so thank you very much for being part of this. This is sponsored by the Institute for Public Policy and Leadership that is run by Casey Welch, and you all know Casey. And we have a number of these events on campus, but there are none that are more important than hearing from the candidates that are going to make a difference in the lives of all of us. So with that, let me just say once again, welcome. We're just delighted you're all here, and we thank the candidates who have given up their time and their Saturday to come out. I know you'd be doing campaigning anyway on Saturday, so this is a good way to do it, and this is a great way because we are on METV. And this means that we will be seen very broadly. We also have members of the press here. I believe SNN is here, and I believe the Bradenton Herald is here. I see you there. Good. Thank you very much. What? Sarasota Herald. Herald Tribune. Terrific. Thank you. We're glad that all of you are here, and we're glad that you will have the opportunity to hear our candidates and to hear what is ahead of us in the coming midterm elections that we've all been waiting for a very long time, and they're finally moving up very quickly, and we're excited about that. So thank you for being here. Let me start out by saying that we have 4 different sessions today, and they are going to be moved up because we've had some folks unable to attend. But this first one, we will be hearing from the candidates for the State Representative District 71. Tracy Pratt is here, the Democrat candidate, and Will Robinson is here, the Republican candidate. So with that, let me say to both of you and to Emily Walsh, who does a phenomenal job, even with one leg on a whatever it is. I know this will be great. She's been very helpful to us in the past. So Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thanks again to all of you for coming.
Thank you so much, and the Observer Media Group is proud to co-host this event with USF Sarasota-Manatee and METV. So today is a forum, not a debate, and we'd like to thank both of you for participating in today's event. The format of today will go like this. We'll give you each a 2-minute opening statement, and then we'll ask you questions where you will also have 2 minutes for your answers, and then we'll close with another 2-minute closing statement. Right in front of you, we have a trusty light that will show you at 1 minute, a yellow light will come on, and when your 2 minutes is up, a red light will come on. Now, if either of you mention your opponent's name or mention your opponent, you will have a 30-second rebuttal time. Any questions before we begin? Okay, we'll start with Mrs. Pratt. Why don't you give us an opening statement and tell us about your qualifications for running and why you are in this race.
Absolutely. So I am Democrat Tracy Pratt. I am a mom. I have 2 kids. They are 10 and 12, and I'm a local attorney. I have my own practice, and I've been in this community since the early 90s. I'm a graduate of Manatee Community College before it was SCS, so that dates me a little bit. And I'm a graduate of Eckerd College, and then I went to New Orleans for law school at Loyola. And I'm married. My husband is here in the audience tonight. He's a local family doctor whose care has been tailored to seniors for most of his profession and vulnerable populations and community health. So healthcare is a big issue for us. But my number one issue is and has been from the beginning the environment. I say I have a lot of opinions about a lot of things, and people who know me know that. But if we can't address our environmental concerns, it's all going to be for naught. And so I decided to run to make sure that my children, who are 5th-generation Manatee County residents, have a Florida to love and enjoy in the same way for their own grandchildren. I'm also running to protect our public schools, to give better access to health care, and to end the epidemic of gun violence. These are my top priorities, and I'm looking forward to representing the people here in Florida in the state legislature.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh, and to the Observer and to USF Manatee for hosting this debate. We're actually in District 71. This campus is actually in District 71. My name is Will Robinson, and over the course of the last several hundred days during this campaign, I've been asked one question the most: why are you running? And for me, the answer is quite simple. I'm running to keep Florida moving forward. Because think back where we were just 8 short years ago. Unemployment was double digits. Most people's homes were underwater. Our state debt was out of control. I never want to go back to those dark Florida days, because for me, it's personal. I was born right up the road, just like my father was. We're actually born in the very same hospital. My grandparents moved here in 1948 from Pikeville, Kentucky, to escape coal country. They loaded up the station wagon with my aunt and 2 uncles and drove down here to Bradenton. They actually opened up a motel right on Tamiami Trail, as locals call it, and ran that motel for a couple years. So for me, it is so important, and every single issue we're going to talk about today, I'm always going to ask the same question, which goes back to why I'm running. Does that issue move Florida forward, or does it move us back? I want to see Florida keep moving forward. Just like when my grandparents came here, they wanted to come realize the Florida dream, which is what I want for everyone to realize the Florida dream as we move Florida forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll start with Mr. Robinson. So if elected to the legislature, what will be your top 3 priorities, and what's an example of a bill you might file for the next session?
Well, certainly the top priority for me is workforce development. We're actually in an educational institution. And while I think we've done a great job with our 4-year programs, I don't think we've done as good a job emphasizing to high schoolers and others that there's other options. Workforce development is a critical, important thing to me, because I've toured probably 200 small businesses in Bradenton and Sarasota, and they all tell me the same thing. They can't find good, high-quality workers for good job slots. And it's as simple sometimes as great education at one of our award-winning technical colleges. We have great technical colleges here, great technical colleges. And I think for some, the 4-year degree was my path. But I don't think a 4-year degree should be the only pathway to prosperity. So the first bill that I would file would be to focus and to frankly fund our technical colleges better, to make sure that those that have a different path could realize it. Certainly a second issue is opioids. That's ravished our area. I am pleased to have the endorsement of both sheriffs in District 71, Sheriff Wells and Sheriff Knight. And we have got to continue to move Florida forward in progress on this area. And finally, and just generally, a huge issue for me is to make sure we spend within our means. We have an $89 billion budget in Florida. We have to invest properly and wisely, but we can't spend beyond our means, because I believe that the taxpayer knows better than government what to do with their hard-earned money. So those would be my 3 priorities.
Thank you. Mrs. Pratt, you mentioned environment, education, and guns as your 3 priorities. Do you want to focus on what an example of a bill you might file for the next session?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, my first priority is the environment. We need to fully fund Florida Forever. 75% of Florida voters voted to expand protections for conservation and recreational lands, and yet we have not fully funded it. I also support reinstating the Department of Environmental Protection. We have gutted it in the last 8 years to the tune of 500 to 600 jobs, so there's no oversight. I would like to see us reinstate the toxic LG task force, which was eliminated under extreme deregulation, which has caused a lot of environmental problems. So I think we need to go back to the environmental regulations that we had prior to this current administration to ensure that we protect our environment, which is our economy, which is our health, which is our quality of life. I also think, as far as healthcare goes, we need to take the Medicaid expansion. 800,000 Floridians would have access to health care that they don't have now if we take the Medicaid expansion. Oh, looks like I'm about out of time.
The yellow means you have 1 more minute.
Oh, I have 1 more minute. Oh, okay, great. So, and then I also want to end the epidemic of gun violence with common sense gun reform that we know most Floridians support. Almost all Americans, 97%, support universal background checks, and yet we don't have them. I'd like to end the gun show loophole, right, which is a private seller loophole, so that way we know who owns the guns in our community. And I agree with my opponent. We need to address the opioid epidemic. I work with people who touch the criminal justice system due to substance abuse problems all the time, and yet we have taken $33.9 million out of substance abuse in our Department of Corrections for people who are returning to our communities to the tune of 33,000 people a year. They're returning to our communities without any substance abuse support. So I have to say, I agree with you on that. We really need to address the opioid epidemic.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's start with you, Mrs. Pratt, on your top priority, the environment. Moat Marine, the Florida Wildlife Commission, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection recently announced more moderate monitoring and research of red tide. What more can the state do to address the problem, if they should address it at all?
Yeah, like I said before, we need to put regulations back in place. And we need to make sure that our legislators are not taking money from big polluters. I have been open and honest about the fact that I am not taking money from corporate PACs and corporate polluters. My opponent has taken maximum donations from Big Sugar, and I will not do that because we know that the nutrients and the toxic runoff going in from Big Sugar into Lake Okeechobee are aggravating the harmful algae blooms that are down there. And we're also seeing connections. And I definitely support Moat Marine. I think we should be a gem of scientific exploration right here. Right here. We have that opportunity. And yet here at USF, you know, the scientists are relegated to trailers in the back of the campus. You know, we have Moat Marine here, which is a true gem, and we could actually expand scientific exploration right here. But we need to have the resources to do it. And so for me, that's a huge priority, bringing scientific resources here into the community, into our universities, into Moat Marine, and making sure that we replace the regulations that were there that protected us from big polluters. This is about the people. This isn't about corporations. You know, we need to make sure that our tax dollars are working for us and that we aren't offering, you know, tax welfare, corporate welfare to the corporations that are polluting our water resources. We need to make sure that we revitalize our waterways with flagship species and make sure that we've got a good mangrove protection. You know, we are facing the potential of giant storms, and I coordinated legal aid around the state post-Katrina in New Orleans. I know how communities are affected by big environmental destruction. We're seeing it again in Michael, right? Storms are coming faster. They're coming more quickly. We know that climate change is happening. Science tells us that. I believe in science. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
Water is the lifeblood of Florida. It truly is. We're surrounded on three sides by water. I want to keep Florida moving forward and not back to where California is right now. California is having a water crisis. So water issues are especially important to me. We need to support those organizations, like you mentioned, Moat Marine, to make sure they have the funding in place to appropriately combat red tide. We got to punish the polluters. I'm a huge fan of making sure those that pollute our environment are absolutely punished to help fund some of this red tide research. And frankly, I think the state could also be doing a great job of letting us all know individually, what can we be doing? We got to take some personal responsibility as taxpayers and property owners. What can we be doing individually to make sure that our environment is safe and clean and secure for us and for our children? So water is an especially important issue for Florida because that's why people come here. That's why we live here, is because we love our waterway. Frankly, my family's history was, in essence, based on water. I told you about my family moving here from Pikeville, Kentucky. They actually first moved to Sarasota. And my grandmother couldn't stand the taste of water, no offense to Sarasota, but couldn't stand the taste of water in Sarasota, so they moved up north into Manatee County. So water's personal to me. Water's important to Floridians, and we need to secure and safely protect our water resources.
Thank you. So, Mr. Robinson, we'll start with your number one priority, which is workforce. One of the perennial workforce issues we hear about in our community is affordable housing. What is your position on the legislature's use of the Sadowski Housing Trust Fund money for other purposes?
We shouldn't be rating it. Workforce housing is a crisis. It's a crisis right now. I've been lucky to do a lot of work with Habitat for Humanity. A lot of their closings. A lot of that funds and those work go to those families to buy their very first home. And there is nothing more special to me when I'm a real estate lawyer, but sitting in a conference room table and seeing people buy their very first home, realizing the American dream. That money, which is called the Sadowski Fund, is paid by dock stamp revenue. So every time a transaction closes in Florida, a tax goes into that trust account. I don't think it's fair that we keep raiding that trust fund for other purposes. Let's be honest with the voters. If we're going to use it for a different purpose, let's change the law. Let's not raid the trust fund, because it is especially important, especially with millennials coming to our area. We need good, affordable housing, and so with regard to the Sadowski Trust Fund, it should not be raided.
Thank you. Mrs. Pratt.
I agree. We should not be raiding that trust fund. We are in an affordable housing crisis here across the state of Florida. And while we're in a growth economy, the majority of the jobs that are being created are low-income jobs, so they're $10 an hour or less. And that doesn't even meet the living wage for a single individual here in the state of Florida. So how are these people expected to find housing when the cost of housing continues to go up? You know, I'm out knocking on doors talking to people all the time, and they're telling me that they are living in substandard housing. They're trying to start families. They want to buy a house, and they can't afford it. We know that we need to have affordable housing to attract the people to our communities that are the cogs of our community. You know, the new law enforcement officer or the new teacher. They need to be able to come here, and they need to have housing for our community to be successful for everybody. So absolutely, I say we stop the raiding. We've been using it to plug, you know, holes in the budget and fund new tax cuts. And I think that's just unfortunate. You know, we've got seniors who can't stay in their houses because they don't have the money to put a new roof on their house. You know, these are things that could be covered by this trust fund that Florida supports, I think, for the most part.
Thank you. Mrs. Pratt, you mentioned minimum wage. Unemployment is low, but wage growth is not keeping pace with inflation for most Florida workers. Are you in favor of raising Florida's minimum wage, and why?
I am absolutely in support of raising Florida's minimum wage. I mean, I think to have a good, solid economy for everybody, people have to be able to live. And like I said, you know, we have a lot of jobs coming into our communities, but they're not enough for people to survive on. The living wage for a single individual here in Florida is just under $12. And yet the minimum wage is just over $8. I mean, that's a huge gap in being able to survive. And I understand that. I grew up in a poor household. I'm a first-generation American on my dad's side. I'm a first-generation college graduate in my entire family. And like I said, I graduated from Manatee Community College and eventually got a law degree. But I tell people the degree that I am most proud of really is my community college degree, because it took me 8 years. Because I worked 2 and sometimes 3 jobs that I had to bike and bus and walk to even get to. Waiting tables, bartending, retail, babysitting on the weekends. I even sold bodices at the medieval fair on the campus across the street. You know, I did everything I can for a little extra money to make sure that I could afford to take the next college class. And if you have to go work 2, 3 jobs and you have to support a family, or you've had a health concern that came up, you can't afford to survive, and you can't afford to take the opportunities that a community college or a tech school is going to offer you, because you're working all the time, because maybe you're having to take care of an elderly or a sick parent or a young child that you've had. So we have to make sure that people have a living wage. We have to make sure that the economy and our growth is working for everybody, not just for the people who are getting rich off of a booming economy.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, your view on minimum wage and raising it.
This is an area where my opponent and I disagree. I believe her approach will take Florida backwards. I want to keep Florida moving forward. The first thing that a minimum wage increase would do would be destroy entry-level jobs. So all those high schoolers that want a job, and now minimum wage increase, what's the number? Is the number 12? Is it 15? Right now it's 8.25 in Florida. Why should a number in Tallahassee work the same as in Bradenton or in Miami? It's once again a big government, big approach. I want to focus Florida forward on increasing jobs and getting better paying jobs, higher paying jobs. I don't want to make Florida the highest minimum wage state. That doesn't make any sense to me. We need to keep Florida moving forward by getting better jobs and higher paying jobs, as opposed to getting government in there to artificially set a number for Miami, Tallahassee, and Bradenton and Sarasota, which won't work. That'll move us backwards.
Thank you. So since we're at an educational institution, let's move on to education. And we'll start with Mr. Robinson. Earlier this week, the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading held its annual community breakfast where they highlighted the dire consequences for children who can't read on grade level by the end of third grade. Despite their efforts, the percentage of third graders reading on grade level dropped in the 4-county region. In Sarasota County, it was 68%, and in Manatee, it was 49%. What can or should the state do to help these sobering numbers?
Well, one of those sobering numbers is, the Department of Corrections forecast people that will be in jail based upon reading level scores at that level. And it's an awful statistic that those that can't read at that level are forecasted for a percentage of them to be incarcerated. This is an issue we have got to solve. I am a proud supporter of public education. I went to Manatee High School. I'm the only candidate here that actually attended a public K-12 school. I'm a proud graduate of Manatee High School. We've got to make sure that our public schools are appropriately funded, but also have options for parents for a variety of reasons. But we need to do a great job and a better job of not only making sure we fund our public institutions, but make sure, I'm a big fan of what we're doing as a state, but I think we've gone a little bit too far in the testing and certainly some of the performance evaluations. I think we need to streamline things a little bit, make things a bit simpler. That's one of the most heard complaints I hear on the campaign trail are from teachers and from students. I don't know what the rules are, Will. While I think testing is important, we've gone too far. And I think if we make things efficient and get the money into the classroom, that's why I'm pleased with Congressman DeSantis. Once one of his planks in his platform, he wants to get the money in the classroom. I don't want money going into administration. And every time we pass a rule or a regulation, that forces districts to hire an administrator. And that's less money that goes in the classroom. So I want to see money going into the classroom.
Thank you. Mrs. Pratt.
Well, first of all, Will, I would like to correct the statement. I actually went to public school, kindergarten through 12th grade.
In Manatee County?
No, in Michigan. Oh, okay. But I did go to public school, and I've got a kid in public school, and I will tell you that we've taken $1 billion out of our public school education and put it into private education. And that's a real problem because this is unaccountable to the taxpayer. I believe we need to return our funding to our public schools. I am knocking on doors and talking to people. I talked to a woman just the other day who lived in a real low-income working-class neighborhood. She's got a special needs child who receives one of these vouchers because the public school isn't offering the services her kid needs. However, that scholarship does not cover the entire cost of education. So her working class family has to then come up with the money to pay for education. I don't support that. I do understand Will's point in regards to the low reading levels, and I believe that's what we're talking about here. I actually work in the prison system. I'm vice chair on the board of the organization Project 180. We help people transition successfully from prison back into the community. And it is true. We see these indications, but there are other causes that create the school to prison pipeline. And I'm sure we'll probably get into the gun issue soon, but the reality is we add too many people with arrest powers into our public schools. It's affecting the disadvantaged, and it's disproportionately affecting minority communities. And so we need to address that as well. I'm saddened. I'm really saddened. You know, I sit on a board with an individual who's on the head of the Literacy Council, and when I hear the statistics, it breaks my heart that kids don't have the ability to succeed. You know, that we are not giving them a path to success. And I believe a lot of that has to do with opportunity and economy in the community. And if we aren't giving people a living wage, they're going to have less of an opportunity to succeed. If we're not giving them a good public school, they won't succeed.
Mr. Robinson, you do have the opportunity for a rebuttal if you'd like one.
No, I'll move on to the next question.
Okay, great. So, Mrs. Pratt, you mentioned vouchers. What is your position on school choice, charter schools, and voucher programs?
Well, I think I came out pretty clearly that I am pro-public schools. I am against the voucher system. I do believe that there are some good charter schools, public, and I'm going to clarify that, good public charter schools that I want to see, you know, remain in the community, but I am completely against for-profit charter schools. Absolutely. I think that schools need to be accountable to the taxpayer. I believe that our school boards need to remain local because they understand the needs of our community and they're able to address those needs if they are given the resources. I'm tired of the high-stakes testing that parents are complaining about. I talk to teachers and they feel like they're not getting competitive pay, and when you look at what teachers are being paid around the country, I think you can see that we can do better. We can certainly put more resources into our public education, and so I don't support vouchers. I don't support for-profit charter schools.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
When I was in Manatee High School, I call it the zip code days. You had to go to high school or school where your zip code was. I find that incredibly unfair. Incredibly unfair. If you happen to be in a bad area of town, you were stuck there. And so Florida has made great progress in options for kids and parents and empowering them over bureaucrats in Tallahassee. So I'm a huge fan of choice. We need to make sure we empower parents and students. I'm actually a product of choice. My parents asked me when I was in 6th grade, Will, where do you want to go to school? And I said, I want to go to King Middle School, Mom. I've never been to a public school before. And it was my choice. And it worked for me. I don't want us to go back. I want us to go forward because there are so many great options. With regard to the voucher program, some of those schools are amazing. For the disabled, the bullied, give parents and they give kids another option. And I think we should be celebrating that in Florida and not denigrating that. So I think that's one of the great things we have in Florida is giving parents maximum choice, not Tallahassee bureaucrats.
Thank you. So, Mr. Robinson, we'll start with you. As we sit here on the campus of a state university that serves our community, what can the legislature do to ensure affordable access to quality higher education for local students?
Well, we need to make sure that tuition remains low. That's one of the areas that I hear a lot from some students is tuition is so high, and that's why one of my big issues is frankly workforce development. We got to invest in we have one of the best university programs in Florida. I mean, some of the schools, including this one, have made outstanding progress. So we need to make sure they're funded and appropriately recognized because we want kids going to university here. Because when they go out and they go to other states, they may not come back, and that's what's called the talent drain. We've done a great job of trying to keep these kids here. We've got to make sure the tuition is low and affordable, and they get a good, high-quality education, so they come back and they bring their families, and they get a good job here. So make sure they stay here and make sure we appropriately fund our post-secondary education.
Thank you. Mrs. Pratt.
Well, I definitely support more education and more opportunities, and I do believe keeping tuition low is important, but we also have to make sure that we have the resources to fund universities and to make sure that we can succeed. And like I said before, I would like to see this area become a gem of scientific education so that we can explore our environmental resources so that we make sure that we can mitigate damage. We know what the causes are that are out there that we can stop to protect our water resources and our beautiful environment. I think USF is great. My campaign manager attended USF. My treasurer who's sitting here is a graduate of USF, so definitely give a shout out. And like I said, I went to college around here, and it was hard. It was really hard. Actually, when I first started going to college, I didn't even have access to student loans. And I had to come up with money out of my pocket, like I said, waiting tables to pay for classes. So I think we need to have lots of opportunities to make sure that people have access to higher education.
Thank you. So Mr. Robinson mentioned Republican gubernatorial candidate Ron DeSantis, but we'll start with you, Mrs. Pratt. We're going to talk about both of your political philosophy. So Democratic gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum says he wants Medicare for all and wants to expand the Medicaid program. He wants to increase the state corporate income tax 55% from 5% to 7.75%, raise all teachers' starting salaries to $50,000, and to transition Florida to clean energy as rapidly as possible. Republican gubernatorial candidate Ron DeSantis says he wants to stay on the same economic policy path as current Governor Rick Scott. Low taxes, low regulations. His philosophy is largely that of reducing government regulations to increase private sector competition. He wants to increase the amount of education dollars spent in the classrooms from 65% of all dollars to 80%. Of these two candidates' philosophies, with which one would you say you're most in sync or likely to support, and why?
Am I first?
Yes.
I'm going to support Andrew Gillum. And let's start with renewable resources, because I think we've touched on a lot of the other topics. We are the Sunshine State, and yet we fall behind our regional neighbors in solar energy and renewable resources. I mean, of all the things, there's a lot of jokes out there about Florida, and I know that. That one I'm actually a little embarrassed by. I mean, I really think that we should be a global leader in renewable resources, especially solar energy. I mean, right now, 38 states have in their laws something that says that their state is going to meet a certain amount of renewable resources, but not Florida. And why is this? Why is this? I think, we're facing a monopoly through the energy companies that really don't want to support us getting energy resources. Like I said, I'm not going to take money from corporate special interests, but I read in the Herald Tribune this week that my opponent's taken $25,000 in a PAC from Florida Power and Light. Is he going to be able to support and withstand any pressure to not move us into renewable resources? I don't know. I'm standing here for the people. I'm standing here for the things that are going to bring us forward, not for the special interests in Tallahassee. And I will not be swayed by thousands upon thousands of dollars coming into my campaign coffers, that aren't going to benefit the people. So 100% solar power. And what else were we talking about? Governor Gillum, that was a long question. It was
just why you would
yeah.
support
Well,
it.
Because I think potential Governor Gillum is really, again, working for the people and not for corporate special interests. I think he's really fighting for everybody in Florida. I think while we had problems in the Great Recession, so did everybody else. While we have a growth economy, so does every other state. It's because we're digging ourselves out of a really big hole. But who is the economy growing for? It needs to be growing for the people.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, do you want a 30-second rebuttal to address your opponent's claim before you answer the question?
I'll answer the question first.
Okay, great.
The Gillum-Pratt approach will bankrupt Florida. And when you hear Medicare for all, I want you to immediately think, especially our seniors out there, think Medicare for none. Medicare is one of the most amazing programs we've had in our federal system that allows those that put money in to protect them in their most vulnerable time. By expanding it outward, it will collapse the system and bankrupt our country. With regard to Medicaid, once again, that will bankrupt our state. The Medicaid system was not meant to be expanded in that direction and will cost billions of dollars to our state. We cannot afford that. There is nothing more important than high-quality, accessible health care, but that's the wrong approach. That's the wrong approach. Because the federal government match isn't 100%, so that money's going to have to go and come from somewhere. And then finally, with regard to the corporate tax increase, Gillum wants to make us like New York. New York's tax rate. Jobs will flee the state, probably to Texas, and bankrupt our state. That's moving us backwards. I want to move us forward. And not with these typical high-tax, high-spend approaches that haven't worked for this state and, frankly, haven't worked for our country. So in those three areas, that would be absolutely devastating to our economy and to the progress we've made as a state.
Did you want to have a rebuttal?
Oh, and I don't know where my opponent came up with that number. The very first person that gave me a check in this campaign was a Democrat. I actually got a little heat for that. Frankly, my opponent's family has given me a couple checks. It doesn't matter to me when you give me a check, as long as you understand my philosophy, which is to keep Florida moving forward and to make sure that our community is first. That's all I care about. That's all I care about.
Mrs. Pratt, Mr. Robinson did mention your name in his
did.
answer,
He
too,
did.
so you have 30 seconds as well.
So I got the information from the Herald Tribune. Anybody can look that up. And yes, you did get a check from my brother-in-law. And when I told him I was running, he said, "Hey, Tracy, I just want you to know I gave a check to Will, but I'm going to give you more."
What about the other brother-in-law? What about the other brother-in-law?
The other brother-in-law and I do not agree in politics. at all. But I would also like to say, I'm married to a man who's involved in community health. We know issues regarding healthcare intimately. This is not going to bankrupt Florida. It's not going to bankrupt the country. My husband just went to a conference recently with the head of our largest insurer who says, we're doing everything we can to ensure absolutely everybody in the state. We believe that people should have health care. So, even the big insurance companies are saying something different. So,
Okay, let's wrap things up, and we'll start with Mr. Robinson with your 2-minute closing statement.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Emily, and the Observer, and METV, and your viewers out there, and certainly for USF Sarasota-Manatee for hosting us and all the students here. It's just been a wonderful experience, and to you, Tracy, for a great spirited debate. I opened up today's debate talking about why I'm running, and that answer is the same. I'm running to keep Florida moving forward. You heard two entirely different visions for Florida. My opponents, which is more taxes, more spending, more regulation, government control of your health care, and generally more government. That's going to take us back. I don't want Florida to go back. I want to keep us moving forward. Move us forward in workforce development so everyone gets the right training for a good job. Move us forward in battling this opioid epidemic. Let's keep Florida moving forward to make sure that parents and students are empowered with maximum education options, not Tallahassee bureaucrats. And finally, let's keep Florida moving forward to make sure your taxes stay low. I don't want to turn us into New York. Our state budget is $90 billion. New York's is almost double, but we have similar populations. I have a hard time believing that a New Yorker has twice the quality of life that a Floridian does. Let's keep Florida moving forward together. I humbly ask for your vote in this election. May God bless you and your families. Thank you.
Mrs. Pratt?
again, yes, thanks for hosting this. I think it is so important to give people a choice. And I think the only way to do that is to have events like this. And so I have been going out for months talking to individuals, and I'm so glad that my opponent has finally decided to join me this week. We're able to draw the lines in the sands for voters so that they have a clear choice. And that is tremendously important. Again, I am running to bring the voice of the people to Tallahassee, not special interests. And I just want to clarify that, again, I will not take special interest money. I will take the voice of the people up to Tallahassee, and I will fight for a clean environment. I will fight for strong public schools. I will fight for access to health care, and I will fight to end the epidemic of gun violence. I am running on a platform that the majority of people support, and I know that the people are going to be with me on Election Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for participating today.